Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Jason,
I'm
virtuoso
so
narrator.
I'm so glad we're doing this.
I am too. We've talked about it for a long time.
We have. I thought, before it all got away from us, that we should, double down on our unexpected mutual admiration society. I think people will be really interested. I mean, especially my colleagues, uh, about what an exchange between a narrator and an author can be like. And
Especially because I feel as if you know my words better than I know them. I mean, I've certainly never had to read this book aloud. So,
yeah,
it's a very intimate, it's a very odd relationship. And usually you don't get to speak to the person who is at the other end of your words, right?
generally in the world of the big five, uh, there's a lot more gatekeepers and, people kind of in between the author and the narrator.
Right.
But it's nice. We sneak off into a room like we do now. I took the liberty of reading your Wikipedia, which gave me a chuckle because I saw you came from Adams.
I grew up in Adams, Massachusetts, population like 13,000,
Wow.
and never knew anything about Samuel Adams. In fact, when I started this book, I said to my brother, something about Adams, and he said, "Oh, but the town is named for John," which is completely incorrect. But that tells you how little known Samuel Adams is in the town that bears his name.
You were an editor before you started writing in earnest or writing big books.
I was at Viking and then at Simon and Schuster, and I had left Simon and Schuster to write a biography of Saint-Exupéry, the French aviator, always assuming I would write that book and then go right back into publishing.
Hmm.
And somehow events turned out differently. But
Interesting.
how about you? How did you end up in this crazy business?
Well, I was raised by an actor. My father was the actor, writer, sometime director Robert Culp. And so I was raised a few miles from here in the San Fernando Valley, amidst divorce and upheaval and boarding school and all kinds of stuff. But my
All
father
the
had a
things that make
huge,
someone a writer and a reader, right?
in fact, my father was away a lot when I was a kid. He was traveling to like exotic locations around the world, and we kids would make audio tapes for him as a way of staying in touch, and he would send us some back sometimes. And I actually have a recording of myself reading A Christmas Carol when I was 9 years old.
There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoat.
But determined to get it right. So
Your fate, you had no idea where that was leading, but your fate was inescapable,
I
right?
didn't. I got the call when I was like 35 to start narrating books, and
What was the first book, Jason?
it was a Danielle Steele. What was it called? Malice. And just to give you an idea of how overconfident I was, I thought, well, how hard can it be to read a book? I'll go sit in the thing, and I barely looked at the script. I went to the Carnegie Hall recording studios, which was just up on a high floor,
I,
and began reading, and the beads of sweat began to pour down my face as I realized, wait a minute, I don't know where this character's coming from. This one has a Boston accent. Oh my God, how am I going to do that? I was so traumatized by my hubris, and I faked my way through that session that I over prepared for audiobooks for years afterward.
so it wasn't the rhythms of the prose, or the plot. It was the voices, it was the dialogue that seemed like it was the most difficult part.
Yeah, I think understanding like how to read prose, I think that took longer to learn once I was doing it. But getting the voices and making sure that the characters were distinct and that you could have, three or four characters in a room talking, and it's going to sound, you want it to sound like different people.
I'm interested in how you find the voices for the characters on the page, but also in how you convey what is so easy for me, which is the punctuation. In other words, how do you convey when you're quoting someone? Is there like an inversion of the voice in a funny way when you're quoting someone, or when there's when something's parenthetical? Is there a way of signaling that?
Since I tend to do a little bit of characterization, like with Samuel Adams, and I always think of actors, in my head because I am so steeped in movies and I'm a real cinephile. And I think Samuel Adams could be like the English actor Jack Hawkins. He had this gruff, manly, not over-accented voice. For Thomas Hutchinson, who is this sort of, foppish, vain, English fellow, I thought, why not Rex Harrison? You're landing on voices that sound quite different. They're in different places in your instrument. But when doing just quotes within a sentence, sometimes you have to learn not to shift too completely into a character just for, that little sort of interstitial, quote of, 10 words or something.
Because otherwise you're interrupting the flow of the narrative too much. Do that, yeah.
And Edward Harriman, who is one of the greatest narrators we ever had, his recording of David McCullough's John Adams is just a masterclass. He would just do this little hitch, the slightest little pause, and change the voice just to being a little more declarative. And you knew it was a quote.
You sort of inadvertently answered one of my questions, which was if there was someone whom you thought hit the gold standard. When you're reading nonfiction, there's someone to whom you look and think, this is as good as it gets.
Edward Harriman was so great, and it rebukes me a little bit because he doesn't do character voices. He, I think, was of the mindset that you would maybe be distracting the listener by too much pyrotechnics in the voice, too much dynamics. I think eventually, I don't think I was so great at it when I started, but over 20 odd years, you get better. To give people a little more of a ride orally. Little by little, over time, all of the hard and fast rules have been loosened. People, break the rules, and to good effect sometimes. And now we have multi-voice recordings. The recording of Lincoln at the Bardo is this, monumental undertaking where there's like 100, different actors. And I think writers sometimes write for multi-voice, now, because they know it's possible.